Have you ever wondered why history played out so differently on different continents? Or why some parts of the world are so much wealthier and more powerful than others? Well, today we're going to dive into Jared Diamond's massive Pulitzer Prize-winning answer in his book, Guns, Germs, and Steel, a theory that tries to solve one of the biggest puzzles in human history.
So, to get our heads around this huge idea, we're not going to start with the entire globe. Instead, we're going to look at a small, tragic, and absolutely true story. It's like Diamond's whole argument, just shrunk down into one powerful example.
Okay, picture this. It's 1835 on the remote Chatham Islands, about 500 miles off the coast of New Zealand. The native Moriori people see a ship arrive. But this isn't a friendly visit. The people on board would go on to slaughter, enslave, and even cannibalize the Moriori, basically wiping their society off the map. And the most shocking part of all, the invaders were their own distant cousins.
I mean, the difference between them was night and day. The Moriori were peaceful hunter-gatherers. They had simple tools and a population of only about 2,000. The Maori invaders, on the other hand, were farmers from New Zealand, with a massive population, a brutal warrior culture, and much more advanced weapons. And here's the real kicker. Less than 1,000 years before this, they were the exact same people. So what on earth happened? It all came down to where they ended up. The Moriori's ancestors settled the cold, harsh Chatham Islands. Their tropical crops just wouldn't grow there, so they had to go back to being hunter-gatherers, which can only support a small, sparse population. To avoid wiping each other out, they actually developed a culture that outlawed war. But the Maori? They had landed in the much warmer, bigger, and more fertile islands of New Zealand. Agriculture took off, creating huge food surpluses. That led to booming populations, specialized warriors, and a culture built on constant, ruthless warfare. It's a perfect little example of how geography can literally shape a people's entire destiny.
Now, that story of two islands is really the whole global story in miniature. And the entire book, this massive theory, was actually sparked by one simple, incredibly powerful question that was asked directly to Jared Diamond himself.
See, back in the 70s, Diamond was doing field work in New Guinea. And there, he met a local politician, a really charismatic and sharp guy named Yali. And Yali looked around and saw the obvious, stark inequality between his own people and the Europeans who had colonized the island. He saw all the stuff, all the material wealth the Europeans brought with them, which he called cargo.
And Yali asked him, why is it that you white people developed so much cargo and brought it to New Guinea, but we black people had little cargo of our own? That question is the absolute core of this book. And it's not really about cargo in the sense of just stuff. It's a question about the very origins of global inequality. Why did wealth and power end up distributed across the globe in the way that they are today?
Now, before Diamond could even begin to answer Yali's question, he had to play detective. He first had to take on and dismantle the most common and most deeply flawed explanations for why the world is the way it is.
For hundreds of years, the go-to explanation, the ugliest one, was race. This is the idea that some groups of people are just born smarter, or more innovative, or just better than others. It's a scientifically bankrupt and morally awful idea, but you'd be surprised how persistent it's been.
Diamond completely flips the theory on its head. He makes the case that in a traditional society like you'd find in New Guinea, daily survival literally depends on your intelligence. You have to know plants, animals, how to hunt, how to navigate. You have to be smart or you die. But in dense agricultural societies like Europe, the biggest killer for centuries wasn't a predator, it was epidemic disease. Survival there depended more on having the right genes for your immune system than on your wits. So, if anything, he suggests, the pressure for raw intelligence might have actually been stronger in places like New Guinea.
Okay, so what about the next theory? Climate. You've probably heard some version of this one. The idea is that toughing it out through cold, hard winters in places like Europe forced people to become more innovative and hardworking, just to stay alive. Meanwhile, people in the tropics supposedly got lazy because the food was plentiful and the weather was always nice.
Yeah, but a quick look at history shows this is just wrong. All the big innovations of civilization. We're talking farming, writing, metalworking. They didn't start in chilly northern Europe. No way. They were developed in warmer places, like the Fertile Crescent, and only got imported to Europe much, much later. The theory just completely falls apart when you look at the evidence.
So if it wasn't race and it wasn't the climate, what was it? With those old, wrong answers out of the way, we can finally get to the real starting point of global inequality. A moment in time when, for all intents and purposes, the playing field was totally level.
Let's rewind the clock way back, 13,000 years ago, to the end of the last ice age. At that point in history, every single human, everywhere on the planet, was a hunter-gatherer. No society had any major advantage over any other. The great race to guns, germs, and steel was about to begin, and everybody was at the exact same starting line.
The answer, Diamond argues, has nothing to do with the people themselves. It was never about some groups being better than others. It had everything to do with the physical land they just happened to be living on. The difference wasn't the people, it was the planet. Put simply, Eurasia won the geographic lottery. It just happened to have the best raw materials. It had the most nutritious, easy-to-grow grains like wheat and barley. It also had most of the world's best animals for domestication. We're talking cows, pigs, sheep, goats, and, crucially, horses. Out of the 14 big domesticable mammals on Earth, 13 were native to Eurasia. The Americas had only one, the llama. On top of all that, Eurasia is spread out east to west, which means crops and animals could spread easily for thousands of miles across similar climates. The Americas and Africa are oriented north to south, which creates huge climate barriers that made it super difficult for these things to spread.
Okay, so you've got lucky plants and animals. How in the world does that lead to guns, germs, and steel? How does that lead to conquering continents? Well, this is where all the pieces click together in one powerful chain reaction.
It's really just a massive domino effect. Think about it. Better plants and animals mean you can produce way more food. More food means you can support larger, denser populations that don't have to wander around anymore. And when you have a surplus of food, not everyone has to be a farmer. This frees people up to become specialists, soldiers, priests, kings, inventors. These are the people who develop complex governments, writing, and advanced technology. That's your steel. And finally, living packed together with your farm animals for thousands of years creates a whole host of nasty epidemic diseases: smallpox, measles, the flu. These are the germs, and over time, the Eurasians built up some partial immunity to them. So when Eurasians began to expand across the globe, they brought this entire package with them. Their guns and steel gave them an immediate military advantage, their centralized governments helped organize the conquests, and, maybe most destructive of all, their germs did most of the work for them, wiping out up to 95% of the native populations in the Americas who had no immunity. So in the end, guns, germs, and steel weren't the real cause of world inequality. They were the symptoms of a 13,000-year head start that was granted by nothing more than pure geographic luck. Diamond's theory is a huge, powerful, and, for some people, a pretty unsettling way to look at the broad sweep of human history. It basically suggests that luck, not any kind of innate superiority, is the main reason the world looks the way it does today. And it leaves us with one final big question to chew on. If the physical landscape of our planet shaped our past so profoundly, what does our future look like in an age where technology and globalization are making geography matter less and less every single day?